Tensions continue to heighten as troops line up along the Russian-Ukrainian border. To talk about this in a little more detail is our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, Ukrainian volunteer forces are preparing to fight off a potential Russian invasion as U.S. troops deploy to Eastern Europe.
Yes, this is actually one of those, wonderful coming together stories. Obviously, the tensions are as high as they can be. The Ukrainians are worried, but that's exactly what brings them together. People from all walks of life have volunteered to be on this force of 130,000 volunteers. They're training over the weekends. They come from all different backgrounds and potentials, and they're volunteering to confront this potential invasion from the Russians. What's amazing about this is that what we've seen up to now is the side by side comparison, saying that the Russians obviously blow the Ukrainians out of the water in terms of their military capability, their military arsenal, and of course manpower. And when you see 130,000 volunteers come, it might just be a drop in the bucket in comparison to the Russians, but it shows that will to fight for their land, for the sovereignty of their land. They have experience with this, with Crimea, with the Russians trying to invade and take parts of their country before. So they're not going to let it happen this time.
And Lisa, the Ukrainian ambassador is warning that Russia is attacking democracy. And you know what? They're not going to stop after Ukraine.
That's exactly right. We had an article up at the foreign desk, 5 reasons why the Russia-Ukraine conflict should matter to you. And that's us sitting here in the West. Why should it matter to us? Well, it's because when rogue countries, when dictators, when they get a piece of the pie, they want the whole pie. They want more pieces, and they will not stop. And the Ukrainians are absolutely right. One of the reasons we should care is to stop rogue players from taking advantage of powerless countries and powerless entities. And trying to gobble them up. Otherwise, we'll just have 3 or 4 empires. We're going to go back to the empire era, and I think for that reason alone, we should pay attention to what's happening in between Russia and Ukraine. And he's absolutely right. This is not just the Ukrainians' issue. This is something that the whole world needs to focus on.
Do you think Putin will go after other countries like Kazakhstan and Belarus, countries that used to be part of the USSR?
Right, that's a great question because why wouldn't he, right? If the message here is that no one's going to do anything about it, they can go ahead and do that. Why not? We already know what Putin's bottom line is, and that's really we should stop and talk about that. He is probably one of the last statesmen remaining on the planet, right? He has made his desire of growing a Russian empire very well known. And in all parts of the world, I mean, even though he is not taking it as Russian land or Russian territory, they have influence. If you look in South America, if you look in the African continent, if you look in Syria and all throughout the Middle East, if you look at their relationship with China, their relationship with the Iranian regime, you know that they want to have or really assert themselves in all of these different foreign policy issues and places throughout the globe. So what would stop them from taking, a little bit of this piece and a little bit of that piece in their own region, which would allow them to territorially expand as well? So I think that it's a no-brainer to say that would be the next thing on their list.
The senators in the United States are very close to reaching a deal on legislation to sanction Russia over its actions on Ukraine, Lisa. Now, these measures may even take place before any invasions. What would those potential sanctions even look like?
Yeah, this is a great question. And the debate has long been, should we sanction the Russians before they even enter? Would that deter them from entering? Or would they say, well, we got sanctioned anyway. The punishment's already on us. We might as well go in and do what we were about to do, right? And I think that that's a very valid question. But it seems like as experts and analysts are warning that it is imminent. It's not a question of if, but a question of when the Russians will invade Ukraine, then they would want to go ahead and speed up the sanctions. And that's why we have the Pentagon and some senators coming together to very quickly put up what they call sanctions that have never been done before, hopefully hoping to hit Putin where it hurts, that he would draw back from going forward into Ukraine. And obviously, the sectors that matter to someone like a Putin would be military, oil, providing oil to Europe, going forward and being included in bodies like NATO and the UN, which we know that the Russians are very sensitive. They want a seat at that table, right? So if we preclude them from involvement in the global community, perhaps that will be a deterrent.
It appears as though NATO has no intention of sending any troops to Ukraine if Russia invades. Why not?
This is what Donald Trump was talking about, Hal, right? Why aren't these government or these global bodies paying their fair share? Why is it always on the United States to say, we're going to send the troops, we're going to send them the military equipment, and we're going to pay the burden of this when it appears to be obviously a global issue and not just one that's for the United States? NATO has said they're not getting involved. Look, this is very typical of NATO. It's a do nothing organization, right? They just like to pat themselves on the shoulder and feel like they're doing something for the global community, and they're not. They're absolutely not. When they refuse to get involved in a situation like this, which does have global repercussions, it's not just an isolated Russia-Ukraine issue, then we know they're for nothing. The United States should not be a part of a body, of a community that does not shoulder the responsibility alongside of us here in the United States. So I think it's really repeating the words of Donald Trump, which is not something we do every day, but we should in some cases, particularly in our foreign policy, because he was right on the money on this one. This is something that he said before he even came into office. As Donald Trump, the entrepreneur, I remember, would go on Fox News and other stations in New York City and say, one of the biggest issues is that the United States needs to hold these bodies responsible for their share. And then they're not doing that. Neither is China, and neither is the UN, neither is NATO. I mean, all these entities are taking advantage of the United States, and it's very apparent in this case.
Now, Lisa, the world's not only watching what's happening between Russia and Ukraine, but also our nation's capital here in Canada, in Ottawa, with Freedom Convoy 2022 and the truckers' protest. A host with the CBC here in Canada was slammed for suggesting that Russia may be behind the Freedom Trucker protests going on in Ottawa. What have you heard? I mean, to me, that sounds ludicrous.
Yeah, when in doubt, you blame it on the Russians, right? Regardless of your political party, you say, if I want to dismiss something, I'm going to say the Russians were behind it and they were trying to insert themselves or sabotage something or get into our country. This is lame. It's dismissive, and there are so many. I mean, I love Canada, and I love Canada even more right now. We are all truckers. We are all with them, and the bottom line here, Hal, for me, I'm going to tear up because this is so important. There are so many people who agree with them. There are so many people who are vaccinated and agree with them. Stop calling it an anti-vax, protest. Stop calling them vandals. Stop putting names on them. Stop saying that Russia's involved. Stop putting swastikas trying to sabotage this movement, because we know that the bad actors, they may be there, but you know what? It deters from the main message is that it is not anti-Semitic, and it is not Russian, and it is not anything but a pure fight for freedom. And kudos to everyone who's involved in this, everyone who's supporting this. I know you have reporters on the ground, Hal, with your network, which is beautiful. We want to know what's going on at every moment. But I think to dismiss this as anything but what it is, which is a grassroots movement for freedom, for people who say enough is enough. There are many, many people who would stand behind them in many different industries, but really kudos to those truckers who took the initiative, and they're setting an example across the world for so many people.
You know, Lisa, you're not alone in your passion. A number of Americans have thrown their support behind the Freedom Trucker Convoy, including Joe Rogan and billionaire Elon Musk. Truckers are receiving support from everywhere right now.
Absolutely. Elon Musk is really such a unique individual. You rarely meet someone who is such a entrepreneur and a scientist of sorts, who's so brilliant, but yet so funny and witty at the same time. And he went to Twitter to obviously support these truckers, and his tweet was just hilarious. Like, enough with politics. Here's a nice picture of some trucks, which really just tongue in cheek really brings the attention back to it is obviously about politics, but here's the basic thing is truckers really just fighting for their freedom. And I applaud people who are on the front lines, and in the when I say front lines, meaning they really are vulnerable to being canceled and cancel culture, for them to put their names, their brands, their millions of followers on the line to support such a movement, it's a beautiful thing. That really tells me that they are, standing up for their values, for what they believe in, and they owe their success to this kind of freedom. So let's not ruin the world with taking away these freedoms. And I think it's wonderful for someone like Elon Musk, who's such a true capitalist, to be fighting for these values. And Joe Rogan, of course, is really the talk of the town these days with his podcasts. And what's interesting is that he's a liberal who's just fighting for the truth, and he's been so pigeonholed because of that. And good for him, good for both of them, and everyone else who's really speaking out. And it's not the popular thing to say right now, even though we know so many people who feel this way. They're anti-mandate, and they want the government to just get out of our business already.
Let's talk about what's happening now in North Korea, Lisa. That country has tested its biggest missile since 2017, and the United States is calling for more talks.
Yes. So there's been some silence from North Korea, right? Silence with regards to the channel of communication between the United States and North Korea, but not silence when it comes to chest thumping and testing their missiles and making headlines. The North Koreans have yet again made headlines about their missile program, and they want the world to know that they're onto something. And of course, Washington had a very knee-jerk reaction saying, we got to call for talks right now because this is getting really serious and really out of hand. So let's see if we can rectify the situation. Let's see if the North Koreans are even open to sitting down, because it looks like, when you have such a rogue player, what would benefit in sitting down with the Biden administration right now? We'd have to see what they would want, how it would behoove them, and what we can do to stop them from the path that they're on.
Lisa, a new report from the United Nations says the Taliban has killed scores of former Afghan officials. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, this is obviously something we knew that was going to happen in Afghanistan, when they would go after those who worked for the previous government and the previous president in the previous military. I actually was able to interview someone yesterday who escaped Afghanistan by going to one of these safe homes that's run by private organizations that are based out of the United States, and able to get out of the country that way. This individual was working for the president and was obviously threatened. He was able to go out onto the outskirts of Afghanistan and escape through this after staying in the safe home, and then get out. Not everyone is as lucky. Not everyone can leave their family. Not everyone can get out and get to one of these safe homes in time. And of course, the Taliban's going after every single one of them. They do not want to deal with a coup. They do not want to deal with an uprising. They do not want to be displaced. They want to stay in power. And to do so, they need to get rid of the old guard. And that's exactly what they're doing. And it's horrific, because these are hundreds of Afghans who served their country, who served proudly and bravely. And many of them, the ones that stood back and stood behind, well, they wanted to fight for their country. So these are among the most courageous of the fighters. And it's very, very sad. But I thank you for bringing additional attention to this story, not letting the Afghan people out of our scope.
Very sad indeed. Absolutely, Lisa. The United Arab Emirates said it has intercepted a ballistic missile fired by an Iranian-backed Yemeni group as the UAE hosted Israel's president.
Yes, and I'm glad you said Iranian backed, because the headlines have all said the Houthis have struck or tried to strike with missile into the UAE. So it looks like, Arab nation on Arab nation, Yemen on UAE. But really what this is a proxy attack from Iran against Israel. The Iranian regime is extremely sensitive about the Abraham Accords. They're very sensitive about the fact that the Israelis and the United Arab Emirates are working together after the Abraham Accords have been signed. And it wasn't just in jest, it wasn't just a piece of paper, but they're truly working together and collaborating, and they've become closer than ever. Israeli President Herzog was in Dubai when this happened, and he, again, it being a symbolic attack, and they went again forward with their meeting, not letting this deter them. It was intercepted, and who knows? Someone wrote an article about how this may be just the beginning of the UAE getting the Iron Dome technology from Israel, yet another collaboration between the two countries. But this, at the very root of it, is obviously the Iranian regime's allergic reaction to the Abraham Accords, wanting to strike Israel where it can in a proxy setting, and showing the UAE that they are not very happy with the decision that they've made to normalize their relations with Israel.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Lisa, thanks again for joining us today from Los Angeles.
My pleasure.